On this episode of Lapeef Let's Talk,
made the law that said this, that, and so, right? However, the people that make the laws collectively, and ultimately they are voted in, and they are a representation of the people that voted for them, which is the population at large. They're making the laws based off of supposedly the best interests of who they represent, their constituents, right? So if they are a representation, if the people that are making the laws and continuously crafting these policies are a representation of the people that voted them in, then that means that we accept whatever it is that they say. So you can't necessarily debate it.
No, I agree with that statement, and I don't necessarily debate it, but I think that it's something to definitely keep into consideration when you're having a conversation like this. Because,
well, can I throw a caveat in there real quick, River? I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I saw Kay's face, and I think Kay may be thinking the same thing, and just allow me to push back, Anton.
Yeah, and I'm going to push back a little bit on that because I definitely believe that being an adult requires mentally being mature. Being that I have a cousin that's special needs, and she's older than me with the mentality of a 5-year-old. So she's not able to be, she's not an adult, even though legally she is, she's not. Even with children, they could have a 15-year-old could have had a life that's been more experienced than me in my age. However, mentally, she is still a child, so we can't absolve that. So it's a mental maturity that I believe that is being in adulthood. And there is a such thing, I think, as being arrested development, especially when you have trauma. Emotionally, immaturity is something that being an adult, you understand responsibility, you understand being accountable for certain things with being an adult. So there's certain characteristics that I would say, yes, this man is a grown man. This man is an adult. Not this man is just a legal man doing childish things. I wouldn't call you an adult.
But Courtney, the problem with your argument is that you're basing it off of how you feel and how you establish it. It needs to be a baseline across the board. So I'll give you an example, right? Okay. I'll give you an example. Or let's just go through a small little conversation, right? How do you determine that a man is an adult?
Yeah. So being an adult, again, it's what are your responsibilities? What is your maturity level? Where is your head at? I don't consider a man being an adult.
But based on what? Like, give me an example.
Based on the definition of what adulthood is. So we're going to have a baseline. Let's look at the factual definition of what an adult is. And it's not legal ageism. What it is, your psychological
part of it is developmental.
It's your mental development and what makes you become an adult. So we're going to have a standard. That standard would be what the definition is. And the definition of an adult is a standard mentally of where you are.
But you just established it by saying that you have to be 25 and your brain have to be fully developed in order to, like, what is the, okay, here's my question. What's the baseline? Like, is it just based off of our own interpretation of what we feel like is mature enough? Because again, when you go back and you say, okay, in yesteryear, they used to do this. Well, we don't live by those standards anymore. So are you evaluating it based off of what standard, when, who, what, where, and who is to establish how mature really is in order to evaluate whether or not somebody is an adult? That's what I'm saying. You don't have a baseline. You can't do anything but use what you feel, right? What we personally feel like maturity looks like according to what society standards are and what's been normalized. But if you want to give it a real life standard and baseline, and you want to say, okay, well, you can't buy alcohol until then, or you shouldn't be able to do this, or you shouldn't be able to drive a car until then, you have to have real life standards or a real baseline as to how you can measure that across the board. Otherwise, then it's just left up to each individual's interpretation. And how do you deal with that?
We kind of touched on that in terms of like the fact that you can't be a child and be an adult. So I think what Courtney's saying is that, all right, yeah, you can be legally an adult in this country. And I like, Anton, that you brought up, this country specifically. You can be a legal adult. Like once you get to 21, like you can do anything, right? For the most part. So even though you're legally an adult, I think Courtney's saying, like, if you don't have certain responsibilities, if you're not developmentally at a certain place, you will not be determined as fit as it relates to adulthood. And she brought up one of her family members that wouldn't be declared, you know, able to make certain decisions for themselves. Anton, I think that it's really interesting while you were talking, it reminded me of, you know, how people say a real man or a real woman. And my pushback is always like what you just said, right? I'm always like, an adult human male is a real man. An adult human female is a real woman. Because like you said, I think sometimes people use that to absolve themselves and to say real men don't do that, but real men actually do. Or real women don't do that, but real women actually do. And they just may not be the type of people, you know, there are other words to describe that. So when you were saying that, it really made me think of that. So I completely get where you're coming from. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation. Everybody,
I love this conversation, but I definitely, I'm sorry, Courtney. I definitely understand the logic of what Anton is saying completely. Very logical, you know, answer is, you know, there's ages put in place and stuff like that. However, I just feel like there's a man somewhere who made the law who said that you're this age and that makes you an adult and that makes you able to do certain things. Because if it were true that, you know, you're 18 or you're 21 and you're able to buy a drink, then how come that's different in all different countries? And I understand that you're saying that, you know, you've only lived here, Anton, and I absolutely respect that. But like, you know, me being very mixed with different cultures, you know, that's not my story. So it just, you know, the legal age here for, let's just say, for instance, for a relationship for a woman, right, is like 18. In Jamaica, that age is like 16, right? So over here, it sounds absurd. It sounds crazy, but at that age, if she's 16 and she's with someone who's 21, it's completely fine. So that's why I don't, when it comes to like,
you know what the problem with your argument is? The very first thing that you said is that some man made the law that said this, that, and so, right? However, the people that make the laws collectively, and ultimately they are voted in, and they are a representation of the people that voted for them, which is the population at large. They're making the laws based off of supposedly the best interest of who they represent, their constituents, right? So if they are a representation, if the people that are making the laws and continuously crafting these policies are a representation of the people that voted them in, then that means that we accept whatever it is that they say. So you can't necessarily debate it.
No, well, I agree with that statement, and I don't necessarily debate it, but I think that it's something to definitely keep into consideration when you're having a conversation like this. Because,
well, can I throw a caveat in there real quick, River? I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I saw Kay's face, and I think Kay may be thinking the same thing, and just allow me to push back, Anton.